They said the sea air in Santa Orilla healed everything, but Miriam Rhodes knew it only softened the edges of what never left. This small California town, with its gentle coastline and postcard charm, liked to call itself welcoming, progressive, safe. But Miriam, 67, blind, and black, understood what that really meant. Safe for some. Welcome, if you didn't stray too far from silent gratitude. Each evening, she walked the same trail along the cliffs, not because it was the safest, but because it was the most honest. The path where her feet could memorize every stone, every root, where the ocean whispered instead of shouted. Her guide dog, Torch, walked at her side, more sentinel than pet. His training ran deeper than obedience. It was intuition. He felt when the world shifted, when it narrowed around them like a threat disguised as a breeze. Miriam wasn't always blind. That came later, after the surgery that removed a tumor, but left her vision darkened forever. It was Daniel who helped her relearn everything, until he was gone too. Her husband, a quiet man with fierce convictions, had been both an activist and an anchor. He taught her how to fight without yelling, how to be seen without explaining. When cancer took him 5 years ago, he left behind only a folded flag, a battered journal, and a pair of military dog tags she now wore every day. They hung from her neck now, warm from her skin, clinking softly as she tapped her cane along the asphalt. Torch slowed near the first bend. Miriam noticed the silence first. No birds, no footsteps, just the low purr of an idling engine ahead. It had been there for 3 nights now. Same car, same place. No lights, no movement. Just presence. She never saw their faces. But she didn't need to. She heard the shift in the gravel, smelled the ozone of an overused battery, felt the way Torch's body braced, not in fear but in calculation. This was not a coincidence. It was a routine that had her name on it. At first, she told herself it was just patrol, nothing unusual. But then it happened again, and again. Different parts of town, different days, same stillness, same watchfulness. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. Not speaking was the point. It made her question herself. It made others dismiss her unease. When she mentioned it to a friend from church, they said, "Maybe you're just on edge." When she asked a store clerk about the cruiser, parked outside 3 days in a row, he shrugged. "They're just making sure everything's safe, safe." Miriam repeated that word every night like a splinter in her mouth. Was it safe to be followed silently? Was it safe to be watched without cause? And if she, with decades of courtroom experience, with no criminal record, with nothing in, her hands but a cane and a leash, if she could be shadowed like this, what did safety even mean? Daniel used to say, "The moment you start shrinking to fit their comfort, they win." That's why she still walked. That's why she wore his dog tags outside her coat, not tucked underneath. That's why she never adjusted her route, not until Torch told her it was time. She felt it before she could name it. The town had changed, not in laws or signs, but in tone. The kind of change you sense in how long someone holds eye contact, in how greetings become nods, in how silence becomes performance. She wasn't imagining it. She had felt too many courtrooms tilt under bias to mistake this for paranoia, and yet the question haunted her. If I can't see what's coming, will anyone believe me when it arrives? That was the cruelty of it. Not just the watching, but knowing. How easily the world could look away and say, "We didn't see anything." Miriam had spent her life forcing people to look at what they didn't want to see. Now she was left to wonder if being invisible again was just another part of the plan. She wasn't afraid. Fear had visited before. What she felt now was preparation, the kind Daniel taught her, the kind that stood not with fists but with spine, the kind that said, "You will not move me." And so she walked, not toward peace, but toward confrontation. Because in Santa Orilla, the streets weren't asleep. They were watching. And sometimes, watching was the first warning. The first time it happened, Torch froze. One paw lifted mid-stride, his weight shifting backward like the earth had changed its angle. Miriam stopped too, cane hovering just above the gravel. She didn't ask him why. She knew the difference between a pause and a warning. Torch didn't stop for squirrels or wind. He stopped when something didn't belong. There was no siren, no flashing lights, just the slow, deliberate exhale of an engine sitting too still, too long behind the eucalyptus trees. Miriam tilted her head, listening past the ocean's breath. The sound was familiar, government-issued tires, low, idle, heavy frame. A patrol cruiser. It wasn't moving, but it wasn't parked either. It was waiting, watching. Torch adjusted position, placing himself slightly ahead of her, like a gate slowly closing. Miriam felt her fingers grip the leash tighter, but she didn't pull back. She never pulled back. She kept walking. The trail curved gently along the bluff, high above the waves. In daylight, it was painted in sun and seagulls, a favorite of joggers and retirees. But at dusk, it belonged to silence. And silence, Miriam knew, had moods. That night, it pressed against her like breath on the back of her neck. She heard the cruiser shift. Just a tire over loose stone, but enough. It followed her now. Slowly, as if pacing a threat that hadn't been spoken yet. She could hear its position, 20 feet back, just far enough to seem innocent, just close enough to own the space. She didn't need to see their faces. She could hear the choice they'd already made. Watch her, not protect her. Torch didn't growl. He didn't need to. His body tensed like memory. Miriam adjusted her grip on the cane, running her thumb over the words Daniel had carved years ago. If you can't see the world, let the world see you. She stopped walking. The cruiser didn't. It rolled closer, halting just behind her, engine humming like a whisper with teeth. The door opened. Boots touched ground. Then another set, the scent of cologne, synthetic leather, and long hours, male, practiced, procedural. A voice, smooth, clipped. Evening, ma'am. Miriam turned toward the sound, not startled, not submissive, just deliberate. I'm walking, she said calmly. We're just checking in. Bit unusual someone walking. Alone out here. I'm not alone. She gestured toward Torch. And it's a public trail. Another voice chimed in, younger, unsteady. We've had calls, concerns, big dog, late hour. Torch stood motionless, every muscle listening. No law against walking, Miriam replied. And he's leashed. A pause. Then the first. Voice again, older, confident, with authority just beneath the surface. You got ID? She raised her head slightly. You think I can read it for you? Silence. She let it sit. Let them feel it. Then she added, If you're asking because I'm black, say it. Otherwise, you're blocking a blind woman's path. The silence cracked. The older officer shifted. She could hear his jacket creak, the holster adjust. Not reaching, just preparing. A performance. Might I ask your name? You just did. Miriam Rhodes. She heard one of them repeat it under his breath, maybe checking a database, maybe just tasting it. She didn't wait. You have no cause, no report, no crime. And unless you're offering an escort, I suggest you step back. The officers didn't. Speak. They weren't trained for this kind of confrontation, not loud, not reactive, just precise. Miriam felt it in the way they hesitated, in the calculation behind their stillness. They weren't prepared for someone who didn't flinch. She turned and kept walking. The cruiser stayed where it was. But she knew this wasn't the end. It was an opening move. Behind her, Torch kept pace, steady as a heartbeat. She didn't ask if they were still watching. She already knew. She felt it in her spine, in the change of air pressure, in the way even the ocean seemed to hold its breath. Miriam. Roads had just been marked. Not by law, but by attention. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that waits for you to slip. But she wouldn't. Not tonight. Not ever. It didn't take long for them to come back. 3 days later, just past sundown, Miriam took the narrow trail behind the mission. It was quieter there, less foot traffic. More eucalyptus, more space for Torch to track shifts in the wind. She knew the risk, but routine was power, and she refused to surrender hers. Daniel had always told her, "The moment you change your steps for them, you've already lost." So she walked, Torch tensed before she heard it. This time the cruiser didn't wait behind trees. It glided beside her like a shark in shallow water. Silent and slow, its engine whispering just beneath the wind. They weren't hiding anymore. They wanted her to know. She counted 3 doors open before the gravel settled. 2 sets of boots. The third stayed inside. "Miriam Rhodes!" the voice called out, like it had practiced saying her name too many times. She stopped. Didn't turn. "I'm walking," she said. "Same as before." Her voice didn't rise. Sergeant Grant Fletcher stepped into view. She knew him now by smell, rhythm, attitude. He had the tone of a man who thought authority made him immune to consequence. "Evening, ma'am," he said. The mock politeness cracked at the edges. "Beautiful dog. Mind if I ask what he's trained for?" Torch positioned himself sideways, placing his body between them, tail stiff, eyes locked on movement Miriam could only sense. "To protect," she answered. "From what?" "From people who step too close without a reason." There was a chuckle. Not Grant this time. It came from Nick Harlan, who emerged behind him, baton swinging loosely from one hand like a toy. He circled slow like he was studying a statue. "We've had reports," he said. "People feeling uneasy." "Uneasy with a blind woman walking her dog?" she asked. "With a military dog and someone who doesn't answer questions?" "Grant," added. Miriam didn't flinch. She let the silence build. Then he stepped closer. Not much. Just a foot or 2. But enough. She heard his boots grind into the gravel, slow, deliberate. The click of a glove being adjusted. A hand reaching, not toward her, but toward the tags at her chest. The ones that used to belong to Daniel. That was the line. She spoke one word. "Guard." Torch moved like lightning without violence. He didn't bark, didn't bite. He lunged, forward, placing his body against Miriam's legs, squared off, muscles tight as steel wire, growling low. A sound that didn't ask questions. It delivered answers. Grant froze mid-reach. Nick's baton stopped swinging. Torch didn't need to touch them. His message was clear. 1 more inch, and the decision would no longer be yours. Miriam stood taller. Her cane remained in her hand, unused. Her face calm, breath steady. "You're escalating a non-threat," she said. Grant's voice changed. "Call him off." "He hasn't touched you," she replied. "Neither have I." "You're making this worse," Nick snapped. "No," she said. "You are, and you don't even see it." From above, unnoticed by the men in uniform, a small drone hovered silently. A blinking red light captured the entire moment. Torch's stance, the officer's reach, Miriam's restraint. Isaiah Lynn, 15, had launched it hours earlier to test a new stabilizer. What he found instead was history unfolding at 30 feet in the air. His grandfather had once been pulled from a barber shop with no charge, no apology. He'd grown up with those stories. He knew what injustice sounded like. Now he was seeing it, unfiltered, undeniable. Down below, Miriam tilted her head slightly toward the sound of the drone. She didn't know who held the controls, but for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel alone. "Back," she whispered. Torch obeyed, easing his stance but not his focus. Grant stepped back too, but his words still tried to hold ground. "You can make this go away," he said. "Don't turn it into something bigger than it is." Miriam's voice was quieter now, but sharper. "Maybe it's already bigger than you can handle." She turned, walked away, Torch at her side. The cruiser didn't follow, but Miriam didn't need sight to know their eyes were still on her. What they didn't know was that another eye had seen it all, and that truth, this time, was recording. They stopped pretending after that night. The cruiser showed up every other evening now, sometimes closer, sometimes across the street, sometimes just parked at odd angles where it didn't belong. No lights, no questions, no commands, just there, like a shadow waiting for hers to stretch too far. Miriam knew what they were doing. It wasn't just harassment. It was surveillance designed to look like coincidence. And the silence? That was the most tactical part of it all. Torch adjusted. He slept closer to the door. He paused longer at corners. His ears flicked at every tire over gravel. Miriam didn't need sight to track the change. She lived it. The shift in posture from strangers at the grocery store. The neighbor who used to hand her mail, now leaving it at the edge of the gate. The veterans' brunch Cleo once helped organize now grew quieter when she entered, as if her presence carried static. She didn't report any of it. Because what would she say? "They're watching me. They haven't said anything. They don't need." So that was the trap. There were no words, no violations, nothing clean enough to file. Just a woman, a dog, and a wall of invisible scrutiny. But Santa Arilla was beginning to splinter. The video surfaced 2 days later. No edits, no captions, just a title, Evening Trail, unedited. Isaiah Lynn hadn't expected it to go viral. He just wanted to show his grandfather that he didn't look away. The footage spread quietly at first, shared in group chats, message boards, one late-night Reddit post with the caption, "This is how they pressure you without touching you." Then, it spread like fire. Local news ran the story. National commentators picked it up. Blind woman cornered by patrol with no probable cause. Veteran-trained dog intervenes in silent confrontation. Screenshots were dissected. Every second of Torch's motion analyzed. Miriam's poise studied. But what shook people wasn't the event. It was how intentional it all felt. The slowness, the encirclement, the reach. They couldn't call it a mistake. It had choreography. Some in town defended the officers. We don't know the full context. That dog looked aggressive. Others, like Denise Ford, Miriam's former colleague turned internal investigator, called quietly to say, "I saw it, all of it. Are you safe?" Miriam responded without hesitation. "Safe is a luxury. I'm steady." The police department made no statement. But inside, pressure built. Detective Loretta Dean, the only black officer in internal review, called from a private line. Her voice was measured but weighted. "We've had other complaints," she said. "Nothing formal, nothing stuck. But now, you gave it form." Miriam paused. "And what will you do with it?" Loretta didn't answer right away. Then, "What you've been living isn't just wrong. It's a system rehearsing itself. And—" You made it stutter. Later that evening, Miriam sat on her porch. Torch lay at her feet, eyes scanning every passing car. The town around her hadn't changed its buildings, but it had changed its temperature. Murmurs followed her steps now. Someone left a note on her door. "You brought this on yourself." That night, her mailbox was bent at the base, dented in like, "Someone had kicked it." She didn't flinch. She bent it back. In town forums, the debate raged louder. "She's making trouble. She's a hero. She's exaggerating." But one message stood out, posted anonymously beneath the video link. If she hadn't stood there, if the dog hadn't stopped him, what would have happened? Miriam read it 3 times, not because she didn't know the answer, but because someone else finally asked. And that was the shift. This was never just about 3 officers. It was about the people who stood by while they operated, about the unspoken rules of small towns and slow violence, about who is allowed to feel safe and who is allowed to be seen without apology. Miriam wasn't a martyr. She didn't want a movement. She wanted to walk, to grieve Daniel, to feel the trail under her feet without flinching. But the town had made her walk a headline, and now she would follow it through. Because she wasn't the only one walking these roads, and if they could treat her this way, with her resume, her silence, her dog, they could do it to anyone, and likely already had. The footage alone wasn't enough. It never was. But it cracked something. And once a crack forms, pressure finds its way in. 3 weeks after the video surfaced, Miriam received the call. "This is Deputy District Attorney Imelda Chang. We're opening an investigation. Your presence would strengthen the case." Miriam didn't answer right away. She sat in Daniel's old chair, the one with the cracked leather and the armrest worn smooth by years of quiet defiance. Torch lay across her feet. The dog didn't move. But she felt the weight of the question settle in the room. "I'm not looking to make headlines," she said. "You didn't," Imelda replied. "You made a record. The case moved fast. For a town used to burying things slow, Internal Affairs opened a review. Officer Rory Shears asked to be reassigned. Sergeant Grant Fletcher went silent. And Officer Nick Harlan, he doubled down, publicly denying wrongdoing, privately lawyering up. Denise Ford, Miriam's old friend, finally spoke. She issued a statement. "This department must learn that presence is not neutral when it is wielded like a weapon." It rippled through the force like cold water. Still, not everyone welcomed the shift. Someone scrawled "liar" across Miriam's fence. A woman at the market whispered, "You used to be so polite." But others came forward, quietly, carefully, a retired postal worker, a young barista, a mother who remembered being stopped twice in 1 week for a broken taillight that wasn't broken. They didn't want to testify, but Miriam would. She didn't need perfect recall. She had the sounds, the breath in the air, the cadence of boots behind her, and above all, she had Torch, still and steady, the memory keeper in canine form. The courtroom was smaller than she expected, the chairs too close, the lighting too harsh. Reporters lined the back wall. Miriam wore Daniel's tags outside her collar. She wanted them to see what they reached for, what they tried to take. Imelda was calm, precise. She laid out the footage, played it again. No commentary. Just a slow, clinical gaze, a blind woman, a trained dog, a cruiser that moved too slow, too close, too deliberately. Then came Miriam's turn. She took the stand. The jurors watched her carefully. She couldn't see their faces, but she heard their silence sharpen. Felt the room hold its breath. She didn't dramatize. She didn't plead. "I don't need sight to know when someone means to intimidate," she said. "Fear is not always loud. Sometimes it idles behind you in a car." The defense tried to shake her, asked if she was emotional, asked if perhaps she misunderstood. "If I misunderstood," she replied, "why did they never ask a question? Why did they circle without cause?" Then came the hardest one. "How did you know the officer had bad intentions if you couldn't see him?" She paused. "I couldn't see him," she said. "But I heard what silence tries to hide. I felt what Torch responded to. I know the difference between being protected and being hunted." Torch was waiting outside the doors, but inside, his presence was undeniable. His stillness, his growl, his refusal to back down. Miriam stepped down without a single tear. She didn't need to cry. She needed to stand. When the verdict came in, it wasn't surprising. It was staggering. Guilty, all 3. The courtroom broke into murmurs. Flashbulbs popped. But Miriam didn't flinch. She reached for her cane, whispered, "Forward," and walked. Past the men who once thought her silence meant surrender. Outside, Torch met her like he always did. Head lifted, eyes locked forward. A young girl handed her a sunflower. "You were brave," the girl said. Miriam bent slightly, not in thanks, but in memory, for Daniel. For everyone who'd ever walked alone and been told their presence was too much. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Sometimes justice doesn't shout. It walks, quietly, precisely, with a dog by its side. The morning after the verdict, the trail behind the mission looked exactly the same. The eucalyptus trees swayed like they always had. The Pacific breathed its salt air against the bluffs. But Miriam knew the path had changed, because she had changed it. With each step, she rewrote what silence was allowed to do in this town. Torch walked beside her, not tethered by leash, but by loyalty. His gait was easy now, not on guard, but never unaware. The gravel crunched underfoot. Her cane tapped with measured rhythm. And the world, for once, seemed to pause not in suspicion, but in recognition. She paused at the curve where it had all started, where the cruiser first slowed, where Boots first stepped too close. The spot where her dog had become her shield, and her voice had become something the system couldn't ignore. She didn't stay long. There was no need to relive it. What mattered was that she had stayed standing. Justice, she had learned, wasn't a final act. It was the refusal to disappear. It was the decision to keep showing up, even when the world tries to unwrite you. Back in town, people still watched her. Some out of guilt, some with gratitude, others still hardened by the discomfort of truth. But now they had to look at her fully, not as rumor, not as shadow, but as woman, survivor, witness. The mailbox was still dented. The word liar had faded, but the paint residue remained, a quiet scar. She left it there, as a reminder, not of what they'd called her, but of what they hadn't broken. Later that day, she visited the Veterans Center, the same one Daniel helped build, the same one where chairs had gone empty after the footage aired. But today, one of those chairs was pulled out. A young man sat there, hands shaking, holding a coffee cup like a confession. He didn't say much, just nodded when Miriam passed. That was enough. Not everyone would say sorry. Not everyone had to. The shift was not in their words. It was in their seeing. And seeing, finally, was what this had always been about. That night, Miriam stood on her porch as the sun sank behind the hills. Torch rested at her feet. The wind brushed against her cheeks, carrying no threats, only memory. She reached for Daniel's tags, still warm against her collarbone, and held them gently. "I told them who we are," she whispered. Not who she was, who they were. The couple who refused to shrink. The woman who refused to stay quiet. The man who trained a dog to protect what systems forgot how to value. And the truth, that chose to walk, and when pressed, to stand. She didn't ask to become a symbol. She asked for peace. But now that the world had heard her name, she would use it to speak for more than herself. Justice had been served, but justice wasn't the end. It was the beginning of being seen. For the first time in weeks, she slept without, waking to phantom footsteps. Torch curled by the door, his breathing steady, his work done. For now, and somewhere across town, in homes where the footage played on loop, a generation that had learned to look away was starting, slowly, to face the mirror.